All right, Jabo, say good morning. Let us begin. Start by thanking our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Iyar, Yona Shushie Ehrenfeld, in loving memory in the nishmas, Yona's grandfather Yosef and Shmuel Aron, Marc Karstaedt in memory of his mother Chana Bat Shraggai, and a week of learning, the Kiwi family, in honor of all of the men who attended the Shiva Minyanim, in memory of Mr. Kiwi Zichrono Lebracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamos will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. Well, so with that, let us begin. So first of all, thank you to Bakam and Akiva Kovacs, to Rabbi Richter for giving the shiur for the last few days. And today we begin a new Mishnah, a new Sugya, an incredible new Sugya. Today's daf is Yudalid 14, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem at the Mishnah. So remember again, although interestingly enough, in the first 13 blot, remember how the Masechta started. Right? The Masechta started with the notion that we sequester the Kohen Gadol for 7 days prior to Yom Kippur. Right? That's the idea. We go ahead, and the understanding, of course, was to ready him for the avoda of Yom Kippur. Interestingly enough, of course, as you noticed over the last 13 blot, we spent virtually no time discussing how that preparation actually took place, because he kind of got not sidetracked, but we kind of went onto a variety of related topics. Now the Mishnah is coming back to the original theme. So we sequester the Kohen Gadol. So why are we sequestering? Obviously to prepare him. Now we get into the nitty-gritty of how we prepare the Kohen Gadol. So says the Mishnah, Kol Shivas Hayomim, all 7 days that the Kohen Gadol is sequestered, who zorek es hadam umaktir es hakitores. He would go ahead and do the zrika, sprinkle the blood, and offer up the kitores. So we'll say, which blood? If you look at Rashi, who zorek es hadam shel tamidin. He would go ahead and sprinkle the blood of the tamid. So we'll remember again, there are two tamidin, tamid shel shachar, tamid shel ben arbayim, a morning tamid and an afternoon tamid, and the Kohen Gadol would take upon himself not take upon himself, but part of his training was to go ahead and do the blood service of the tamidin for both the morning and the afternoon. Furthermore, maktir sakitores, he offers up the kitores, umetiv as haneros. And what does he do? Now, we'll say metiv as haneros literally means prepares the neros. Now, what does this mean? If you look at Rashi again, metiv as haneros, medashin min efer hapsilos shakavu. So we'll say the first step in menorah preparation is going ahead and removing the ash. Remember again, the menorah would burn, the wicks would burn, and they would leave ash inside of the receptacles and the cups of the menorah. So first step, meitiv as haneros, would be the Kohen would clean out the cups of the menorah. I'm sorry, we'll say I forgot. A special thank you to Dr. Ron Gartenhouse for dedicating the breakfast this morning. In Lezech Lilu Nishmas, his father, whose yahrzeit was yesterday, Hachazan Uri Lipa ben Baruch. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, in the merit of all of the brachas, the neshama shtav and aliyah, the family in nechama, and thank you very much, Dr. Gartenhouse. Shkoyach. We'll say also a very special thank you to Saeed. I don't know what time Saeed got here this morning to start doing this, and he gave up of his sleep. He also gave up pretty much of his shachris and everything else to go. And now he's learning to be able to provide us all with breakfast. So when you see him, just make sure to give him a very hearty yasher koach. All right, so the Mishnah goes on. Umaktir sakdoras, and he offers up the ktoras. Umetives haneros, and he goes in and cleans out the ash of the mizbeach. So in that same Rashi of the menorah. So in that same Rashi of umetives haneros. So once again, umedashim min efer apsilo shakabu, he cleans out the ash of the wicks which burned in the menorah. V'chein kol yom v'yom mativin baboker. Every single morning they would clean out the ash from the receptacles of the menorah. The Rashi goes on, shenemar baboker ve'tivo as haneros. Uvechol yom maktirin kitoras behechol pras b'shachris upras ben arbaim. Also, because the very next statement in the Mishnah, the previous statement was maktirin sakitoras. Remember again, the kitoras service itself was split up into two parts: part in the morning and part in the afternoon. So pretty much you have the Kohen Gadol doing all of the various we'll call it avodos, daily avodos in the Beis Hamikdash. Umakriv es harosh. And he goes in and offers up the head as well as the hind leg of the carbon tamid. So I'll say this is what the Kohen Gadol is doing all 7 days. So just so you appreciate what's happening over here, what the Mishnah is describing is the daily service in the Mikdash. So whereas normally what would happen, this would be divided up. Remember again, we've spoken about this many times. There are 24 Mishmoros, right? 24, we'll call it Kohanic watches. So which means each Mishmar served approximately 2 weeks in the Beis HaMikdash. Each Mishmar was comprised of multiple Bate Avos, and each Beis Av was comprised of different families. So you'd have a particular Mishmar that was in the Beis HaMikdash on a particular week, and they would divide up the Avodas throughout for all the conferences. So everybody should get a chance. This week in the Beis HaMikdash, ultimately again, the Kohen Gadol did everything. He did everything. Now, we'll say, just to understand why are we doing this? In other words, why this is like Kohanic Iron Man, right? Why are we doing this to the Kohen Gadol? Because remember, we're going to see on Yom Kippur, the avoda is only kshera bo. The Kohen Gadol has to do all of the avoda on Yom Kippur. So to get him proficient, and remember, everything also has to happen with a certain amount of, we'll call it alacrity or zrizos, meaning we're on the clock. So at the end of the day, we train the Kohen Gadol to be proficient in these avodas. The Mishnah then adds in, ushar kol hayamim, that the truth is during the rest of the year, imratza lahakriv makriv. So we'll say this is very interesting. One of the rights of the Kohen Gadol is he could walk in any time to the Beis HaMikdash and choose to do the avoda. So in other words, normally if you're a regular Kohen, you have your week, and in that week you have your day, and in that day you probably have your particular service. Remember, you don't even get that whole day. But if you are the Kohen Gadol, you have the right to come into the Beis HaMikdash and choose to do whatever avoda you want, whenever you want. Shar kol yomim imratza lahakriv makriv. Why? Shekohen Gadol makriv chelik berosh. Because at the end of the day, the Kohen Gadol, literally again, gets first dibs, gets first chance to go ahead and do whatever hakrava, whatever offerings he wants. If you look at Rashi, makriv chelik berosh, rosh hu lahaktir u lahakriv kol chelik sheyivchar. At the end of the day, Kohen Gadol gets the right to choose any avoda he wants. Whatever he wants, he has the right. He has the right to go ahead and do. I'm sorry. He has the right to go ahead and do. So that's the Gemara. So that's the Mishnah, excuse me. Says the Gemara, Mantana, who is the opinion? First of all, take a look at Rashi. I'm sorry. Benotel Chelko. Rashi says over here, Mane Yafesh Sheyivchar. I'm sorry. Note Chelko bechalukas achilas kodshim berosh Mane Yafesh Sheyivchar. So I'll say, interestingly enough, not only does the Kohen Gadol have the right to come in and to go ahead and choose to do any particular avodah he wants, he also has the right to choose whatever Kohanic portion he wants. So again, we'll say it's good to be king, right? So the Kohen Gadol is the king, so he could come in and pretty much do any avodah he wants, also choose any portion he wants. Good. So we'll say, says the Gemara, Mantana, who is the opinion reflected in this Mishnah? So Amar Rav Chisda, the Lok Rabbi Akiva. So the Gemara says it's not Rabbi Akiva. Why is it not Rabbi Akiva? The Rabbi Akiva, and I both say this is fascinating. Remember, let's take a step back for just a moment. Because remember, we learned something very important in the previous Mishnah, which was, remember, what are they doing to the Kohen Gadol all 7 days of his preparation? What were they doing to him? They were sprinkling on him waters of Para Aduma. Right? Remember, each one of the 7 days. Now remember, we established there was a machlokes. Is that because it's necessary? Is it because it's a chumrah? So remember, when we say all 7 days, it's not really a little review. It's not really all 7 days, right? Which day are we not sprinkling the Kohen Gadol? Day number 4, right? And Shabbos. So remember again, the distinction between Para Aduma and the 7 days of sequestering for Kohen Gadol is Para Aduma. The Rambam says, what do? You make sure that you begin the counting, right? You make sure you begin the counting so that the 4th day in Shabbos will line up. But obviously for the 7 days before Yom Kippur, we can't control when that falls out. So at the end of the day, again, we don't sprinkle him on day number 4 and on Shabbos Kodesh. But in any event, let's just go with the idea. We're sprinkling the Kohen Gadol all 7 days of his sequestering. So the Mishnah of the Gemara says clearly does not reflect the view of Rabbi Akiva. Because what does Rabbi Akiva say? This is incredible. Di Rabbi Akiva ha'amar tarshanaf lalav hazat ham aso. Wow. Let's see, Rabbi Akiva holds that if you are tahar and you have been sprinkled with the waters of the Para Aduma, you become tameh. Dramatic. Well, see, you hear this? Rabbi Akiva holds that Allah l'maisa, if you are tahar and you become sprinkled with the waters of the Para Aduma, you become tameh. Therefore, Rabbi say, the Mishnah This Mishnah cannot reflect the view of Rabbi Akiva. Why not? So let's just talk this out for just a moment. What did the Mishnah just teach me? In a nutshell, what did the Mishnah teach me? Kohen Gadol does everything for the 7 days leading up to Yom Kippur. In order for the Kohen Gadol to do everything, he has to be what? Tahar. Now again, how does that stem with what we learned in the first Mishnah, where we're sprinkling the Kohen Gadol with the waters of the Paraduma every single day? So the Mishnah must not reflect the view of Rabbi Akiva. Because according to Rabbi Akiva, if you are tahar and you get sprinkled with the waters of the paraduma, you are tamei. And if you're tamei, you can't do the avoda. So therefore, the Gemara just says the Mishnah must not reflect the view of Rabbi Akiva. So the Gemara says, the Rabbi Akiva amar tar shnaf lalav hazaaso tamaso. Rabbi Akiva holds, if you are tar and we're sprinkled with the waters of paraduma, you become tamei. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, that you become tamei from the sprinkling of the waters of the paraduma, Heichi avid avoda. How would you be permitted to go ahead and perform the avoda all 7 days? Therefore, again, it must be that the Mishnah does not reflect the view of Rabbi Akiva. This Sanya, so we'll say, now let's blow this machlokes open. This is incredible. This Sanya, v'hiza hatar ala tamei. So the pasuk says, when speaking about paraduma, literally the person who is tar will sprinkle upon the tamei. Al hatamei tahar va'al ha-tahar tamei. So Rabbi Akiva understands that the pasuk is coming to teach you something very important. When do the waters of para aduma work? When it's v'hiza hatar ala tamei. When someone who is tar sprinkles on someone who's tamei, that makes the person who is tamei ultimately again tar. But if you have ala tar, if you're sprinkling the same waters on someone who is tar, ultimately again that makes them tamei. These are the words of Rabbi Akiva. And I will say the logic of this we'll see in just a moment. The Chacham say no. Ein dvarim halalu amurin ela b'dvarim hamekablin tuma. The Chacham say, Rabbi Akiva, you're dashing the pasuk in the wrong way. And the pasuk is actually coming to teach us, ultimately again, about sprinkling the waters on something that is mekabel tuma. Now, what does this mean? So let's first go ahead and read in the Gemara, then we'll go back and catch up on some Rashi. So, Mahi, what did the Chachamim say about sprinkling on something that is mekabel tuma? So we'll say this is a fascinating case. Mahi gidisnan. Listen to this. Niskave mahazos ala behema. We'll say, so let me give you just a word of background with this. The halacha is that if you go ahead and you do work with the waters of the para aduma, you disqualify them. What does it mean, do work with them? So we'll say, let's say you were to go ahead and, on a simple level, let's say you're weighing something and you were to use the waters of the para aduma as a countermeasure, as a counterweight, right? So that would invalidate the waters of the para aduma. Similarly, again, if you sprinkle them in an inappropriate way, that also has the capacity to invalidate them, because that is called they were used for some type of avoda. Meaning, just like the para aduma itself is disqualified if you use it for work, so too the waters are also disqualified if you use them for work as well. But work, we're going to see by the waters themselves, could also mean inappropriate sprinklage. I don't know if that's a word, but I like it, right? Inappropriate sprinklage. So I'll say, watch this. So the Gemara says as follows. Listen to this case. But say, let's say you had in mind to sprinkle the waters of the para aduma on an animal, which also, of course, would be an insignificant act. But what happens? You ended up sprinkling it on a person. Okay, so we'll say, we'll analyze it in just a moment. Im yesh be'ezov. Let's say now, so again, your intention was to sprinkle it on an animal, but you ended up sprinkling it on a person. And now what happens? There's still more water left on the hyssop. Also, remember again, the way that paraduma works is you take the ashes, you mix them with mayim chayim, right? You mix them with spring water. Then you go ahead and you take a hyssop plant, you dip it into the water, right? You dip it into the water and then you sprinkle it like that, right? You sprinkle the hyssop. So now what happens? I had a mind to sprinkle on an animal, but I ended up sprinkling on a person. I realized now that I had the wrong machshavas, right? My kavanah was wrong. So now I realize, oh, no problem. There's still more water. There's still more paraduma water left on the hyssop plant. So now the Mishnah says, as long as there's more water remaining, you could sprinkle again with that same water. Meaning, the remaining water does not become disqualified, invalidated. However, so look at Rashi for just a moment. This kidistan is kavin im yesh be'ezov yishana. So listen to this. So the Rashi says, Kilomar ru'uyin hashirayim lahazos al ha'adam. the leftover water in the hyssop plant is fit for use to sprinkle upon a person. So we'll say, so in this case over here, even though your kavana, listen to what's happening over here. Your kavana was for an animal, right? But at the end of the day, who did you sprinkle upon? A person. So remember, does the sprinkling work? Does the sprinkling work? No. Why? You didn't have the right kavana. But because you ended up sprinkling on a person, we don't count it as if you used the water for avoda, for some type of work, right? So therefore, again, if there's any water left over on the hyssop plant, you could use the remaining water to now sprinkle upon the person with kavana. Conversely, niskavim lahazos ala adam. If you had intention to sprinkle the water on a person, vihiza ala behema, but you ended up sprinkling it on a behema, im yesh be'ezov lo yishana. Both say in that case, even if there's leftover water, you can't use the leftover water. Now, when we say that you can't use leftover water, you can't use leftover water where? That's absorbed in the hyssop plant. Obviously, the rest of the water you have in the kli is totally fine. So, both see here what's happening in the second case. In this second case, you had the right kavana, but the wrong action. Right kavana, but the wrong action. And therefore, again, what happens in this case? Because you had the right kavana for using it for a person, but lamaisa, you sprinkled it on an animal, that's called an act of avoda. It's called an act of avoda, and therefore, again, the remaining water in the hyssop plant will be disqualified. You can't use it. Look at Rashi again. Lo yishana, Rashi says, denifsulu b'melacha. Because at the end of the day, even though you had kavana for a person, since you ended up sprinkling it on a behema, that's called avoda. That's called doing work with the water of the para aduma, which disqualifies the water absorbed in the hyssop plant. The hazah shal behema ein shem hazah ala v'havilu kimayim shenasis b'malachas. Well, see here the two cases. Case number one is where I had kavana to sprinkle it on an animal, but I sprinkled it on a person. So we'll say, let's go through this. So is the sprinkling effective? Sprinkling effective? No. Why not? I didn't have the correct kavana. Is the water disqualified? No. Why? Because at the end of the day, I used it for sprinkling on a person. You can't say that I used it for quote unquote avoda. So therefore again, as long as there's more water remaining on the hyssop plant, I could just sprinkle the person again with the same remaining water. Conversely, in case number two, I had kavana to sprinkle on a person, but I ended up sprinkling on a behema. So obviously the sprinkling doesn't work because you did it on a behema. But can I use the remaining water in the hyssop plant? And the answer is no. Why not? Because now that I used that water to sprinkle on a behema, it's ki'ilu, it's as if I did avoda, ultimately again with that water, with that water paraduma, and therefore ultimately it becomes disqualified. So what you would have to do in that case is you would just simply shake out the rest of the water and have to redip and sprinkle again. Redip and sprinkle again. So just so you understand, it all comes down to this pasuk. V'hiza hatar ala tameh. So Rabbi Akiva understands. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. Rabbi Akiva says v'hiza hatar ala tameh means that it's only when someone who's tar sprinkles on someone who's tameh that the person who's tameh becomes tar. But if you sprinkle on a person who's tar, he becomes what? Tameh, according to Rabbi Akiva. Chacham say, what are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. V'hiza hatar ala tameh means that the way to use waters of paraduma is when you sprinkle it on someone who has the capacity to become tameh, like a person. But if you sprinkle paraduma on a behema, does the behema have the ability to become tameh? No. Therefore, if you end up sprinkling water on the behema, that disqualifies the water because it's treated as if you did work with the water. And if you do work with the water itself is disqualified. That's machlokes. These are atala tameh. You see something, by the way, an incredible musar in the words of the Chachamim. That I will say, what do we really strive for in life, right? If you want tara, right, paraduma is the paradigmatic example of tara. And if you want tara in life, what do you need? You need the right kavanas and you need the right actions. Right? At the end of the day, I really need both. Now, most of us, I don't know that most of us actually get to that level. I think the place to kind of shoot for, at least initially, is the right actions. Sometimes doing the right thing is the most important thing, even if you're not doing it for the right reasons, the right actions. But sometimes in life, it's good to know ultimately where I would like to get to, even if I'm not necessarily going to get there anytime soon. So the Chachamim say the ultimate paradigm of Tara is where you have purity of intent and purity of actions. My kavanas are correct, my maisim are correct. I don't just do the right things, but I do the right things for the right purposes. That is the goal to which we all aspire to achieve. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, "My time with Rabbi Akiva." So we'll say, what's Rabbi Akiva's logic? And we'll say, if you think about it, it still is a little bit of a far cry to say that from the Hiza Hatar ala Tameh, I'm now going to learn that if you're Tameh and you get sprinkled, you become Tar. But if you're Tar, you become Tameh. How does Rabbi Akiva darshan that? So listen to this, because Rabbi Akiva says, "Nichtuv Rachmana v'Hiza Tar alav." The pasuk could have just said that the person who is Tar should sprinkle the waters of the Para Aduma on him. Allah, could have just said that. My ala Tameh, why does it have to say he will sprinkle the waters on the Tameh? I both say it's true. That phrase really is a little bit extraneous. Of course he's sprinkling on the Tameh. Who else is he sprinkling it on? El the Gemara says, My ala Tameh shmamina, ala Tameh tar, vala tar Tameh. Ultimately, again, so Rabbi Akiva says the fact that it goes out of its way to tell you the Hizra Tar Tameh tells us that what? It's only when you sprinkle the waters on someone who is Tameh that he becomes Tar. But if you sprinkle it on someone who is Tar, he ultimately again becomes Tameh. Incredible. Rabbanan. And I will say the Rabbanan use that phrase as we just mentioned before to teach me the halachas that the waters are only considered to be effective if you sprinkle them upon something that is mekabel tuma, i.e. a person. But if you sprinkle the waters, let's say on an animal, the waters become disqualified because it's ki'ilu you've done an avoda, it's ki'ilu you've done work with the waters. So the Gemara says, aval hacha kavachomerhu. So the Chachamim will say, and furthermore, there's a simple kavachomer. What's the kavachomer? Imala tame tahar ala tar lakol shekain. So we'll say, so the Rabbanan will say back to Rabbi Akiva, come on. If the waters of the paraduma have the ability to make someone who is tameh, tahar, then all the more so they have the ability to reinforce the tahara status of someone who is already tahar. See, okay, so what will Rabbi Akiva say to that? Rabbi say this is incredible, Rabbi Akiva. So that's a good kavachomer. How would Rabbi Akiva respond? Rabbi Akiva, Hainu de Kamer Shlomo. We'll say, remember again, Rabbi Akiva says, you're saying good, but this is exactly what Shlomo Melech meant when he said, Amarti, quoting over here the pasuk from Kohalas, Amarti echkama v'hiracholka mimeni. Shlomo Melech says, I thought I was very wise, but I realized that wisdom is far from me. So we'll say, so the Chazal Darshan, the Gemara Darshan, that Shlomo Melech was saying that particular pasuk regarding Para Aduma. That Shlomo Melech, who was the Chacham Mikol Adam, was the wisest man of all time, was able to figure out everything. The one thing he could not figure out, he could not wrap his head around, was Para Aduma. So Rabbi Akiva says, I agree with you, Rabbanan. It's totally counterintuitive, right? It doesn't make any sense. There's something that makes a Tameh Tahar should make a Tahar Tameh. But you know what? Not everything in life makes sense. Or I should say differently, not everything in life makes sense to us. I was saying this is an incredibly important yesod, that the Ribono Shel Olam by design put things into his Torah that leave us scratching our head. Because one of the most important lessons in life is to recognize I don't understand everything. I don't understand everything. Rabbi Soloveitchik speaks about the concept of, I've mentioned this before, of teku in the Gemara. So the Rav says, why does the Gemara have to end with teku? Right? Think about this for just a moment. Chazal couldn't work it. Rabbi say, by the way, whenever a sugya ends with teku, right? Is there halacha l'maisa based on a teku? Absolutely. In other words, you still have to know what to do, right? In other words, when there's a machlokes and the Gemara says teku, you'll still find something quoted in the Rambam, or you still find something quoted in the Shulchan Aruch, because you have to know what to do at the end of the day. So the Rav says, so why does the Gemara end off with teku? So the Rav says so beautifully, because Chazal were teaching us an incredible lesson, that you have to learn to live with unanswered questions. You have to learn to live with unanswered questions. You see, sometimes the human intellect, we become a little bit gaivadik, and we think that we have a right or that we have a capacity to understand everything and to answer everything, and it's not true. What makes the Ribono Shel Olam is that he has the answer to everything, and he knows everything, and if we're not him, then by definition we live life with many unanswered questions. We live life with many tekus, and that's part of our avoda, to accept, does everything have an answer? Of course. but not necessarily comprehensible to us. Does everything make sense? Of course, but just not necessarily to us. And part of our avoda as Jews is to learn to live life with unanswered questions. Part of our avoda as Jews is to learn to accept the fact that I'm not going to understand everything, that not everything makes sense to me, but my Amunah tells me that the Ribono Shel Olam runs the world. And even though I don't understand it, I accept it because I know that it comes from my Father. I know that it comes from the Ribono Shel Olam. So even Shlomo HaMelech, the wisest of all men, had to say, Amarti achkama, I thought I was so smart. V'hi rechoka mimeni. I will say, by the way, it's incredible. If the smartest of all men makes that statement, right, then imagine how often we have to recite those words as well. Amarti achkama, I thought I was so wise. V'hi rechoka mimeni. But I recognize that I really know very little in this world, but I'm okay with that. So you both say, that's the chap. I'm okay with that. I could live with teku. I could live with questions. I could live without understanding things because I know that the Ribono Shel Olam has got it. Even if I don't understand it, He's managing everything, and that's enough for me to go through life. And I will say, let's tell us one more thing, and then we'll go on, which is, you don't have to have all the answers in order to be successful in life. This is incredibly important because you see people often get sidelined by profound theological or philosophical questions or quandaries. If I had to have all the answers in order to be successful, then I would have all the answers. I don't need all of the answers in order to be successful. Whatever my shlichus is, people think it's just Chabadniks who are on shlichus, right? Everybody's on shlichus, right? So I will say, so whatever my shlichus is in this world, I don't need all of the answers in order to be able to be successful. Because if I needed it, I would have it. If I don't have it, then by definition, I don't need it. So let's go right there. So the Gemara says, so the Rabbanon, what do they do with this pasuk? Listen to this. Lemaza ulemazan alav tar. So we'll say this. The Rabbanon say, you're right. There are many enigmatic pieces of para aduma that defy comprehension. For example, the fact that the person who sprinkles the water and the person who gets sprinkled on, we'll narrow this in just a bit. Artar v'nogea bahem tameh. Yet if someone touches the waters of the para aduma, you become tameh. So the Gemara says, what? Umaza tar, is that true? The person who sprinkles the water is tar? V'aksiv umaza me'ani de'yichabes begadav. But the pasuk says the one who sprinkles the water has to, we'll say, mechabes begadav literally means launder. He has to immerse his clothing, which means he becomes tameh. So my maza, no. When we said maza, what does maza mean? Nogea. It means ultimately, again, one who touches the water. V'aksiv maza, v'aksiv nogea. But the Torah says explicitly that the one who sprinkles and the one who touches the water both become tameh. So the Gemara says, va'od, maze baiki bus begadim, nogea lo baiki this begadim. Furthermore, again, the maze requires immersion of clothing. The nogea doesn't. Ella, my maze. So we'll say, what does it mean when the pasuk said maze? Oh, I'm sorry, when the Rabbanan said maze? No say. Oh. We'll say maze in this context means no say. One who carries the waters of the para aduma becomes tameh. One who carries the para aduma becomes tameh. So we'll say, so just to be clear, what's happening over here? Everyone's agreeing that Shlomo HaMelech's phrase of Amarti echkama v'rechoka mimeni, I thought I was wise and now I realize I'm not so wise, is a reference to Shlomo HaMelech grappling with understanding para aduma. According to Rabbi Akiva, that referenced the concept that if you sprinkle waters of para aduma on someone who is tahar, he becomes tameh. Shlomo says it's illogical to me. According to the Rabbanan, it's referencing the fact that if you just go ahead and carry waters of para aduma, you become tameh as well. So the Gemara says, "I b'nichtov rachmana no say." So why doesn't the Torah just explicitly say that if someone carries the water of para aduma, you become tameh? My tamek siv mazeh. So we'll say, why does the Torah refer to the carrier as the sprinkler? Hakamash malan debainan shir hazah. It's very interesting. We'll say to teach us the following halacha, which is that when are you chayiv? Not chayiv. When do you become tameh? When carrying waters of para aduma? Only if what? Only if you carry enough to sprinkle. So I was supposed to say there's a shear. You only become tameh carrying the waters of the para aduma if you carry the shear, with the shear of sprinkling. So the Gemara says, 1 second. Hani chalaman damar hazal tzricha shear. Alaman damar hazal ain't tzricha shear making. I will say this is a machlokas, right? That works fine according to the opinion who says that sprinkling requires a shear. But what about according to the opinion that says that sprinkling doesn't require a shear? Then how do you explain this? To which the Gemara says, no. Afilu damar hazoyin tzricha shear. Hanimili agabo de gavra. Aval b'mana tzricha shear. Moses, listen to this. There's only a machlokes when it comes to shear about is there a shear of sprinkling? In other words, when sprinkling, do you have to sprinkle a certain amount of water on the tamei individual? But everyone agrees that you need a shear, you need a certain amount of water inside of the kli, inside of the utensil, right? So remember again, I make the para aduma waters inside of a kli, ashes, spring water, I mix that together. Everyone agrees that kli requires a shear. There must be a shear in that kli. The machlokes is there a certain amount that has to be sprinkled upon the tamei individual? That's the machlokes. But everyone agrees in the kli there must be a shear. This not because we learned how much water? How much water do you need in the kli in order that it be fit for sprinkling? Ultimately, we'll say enough to go ahead and dip in the tips of the hyssop plant, right, and then be able to sprinkle it. So we'll say so that has to. So you have to. Everyone agrees that in the kli itself there has to be at least enough water that you could dip in the hyssop plant and then go ahead and sprinkle it. And as a machlokes, do you have to sprinkle a certain amount of water upon a tamei individual or not? Good. So the Gemara says, Abaye Amar, Afilu Tim Rabbi Akiva. So we'll say, now let's loop all the way back. Remember, how do we get into this whole discussion over here? The Mishnah told us that the Kohen Gadol is doing the avoda, the daily avoda, each and every day of the 7 days, right? That was the point of the Mishnah. Then the Gemara just said, by the way, the Mishnah must not reflect the view of Rabbi Akiva. Why not? Because remember, what did we learn previously? That the Kohen Gadol is being sprinkled with the waters of the para aduma each and every day. Well, according to Rabbi Akiva, if you're tar and you get sprinkled by the waters of the para aduma, what happens? What happens? You become tamei. So the Mishnah is not reflecting the view of Rabbi Akiva, which we would say is fine. It can be reflecting the view of the Rabbanan. That's okay. Then we got into a whole discussion regarding para aduma. The Gemara says, now we come full circle. Abaye Amar, no. Afilu Tim Rabbi Akiva. Not true. The Mishnah works even according to Rabbi Akiva. But 1 second. How could the Kohen Gadol then go ahead and be sprinkled with the waters of the para aduma and still do the avoda each and every day? This is incredible. The Gemara says, the avid avoda kula Yoma. It's very simple. We let the Kohen Gadol first do the avoda of the day. Ulefanya madu aleh, and right before evening, we sprinkle him with the waters of the para aduma. V'tavil, he goes to the mikvah. V'avid herev shemesh, and then that night is herev shemesh. And then I will say, so again, this is such a simple answer. See, I will say it's so interesting how we create constructs in our minds. You see, the Gemara was always presupposing that when are you sprinkling the Kohen Gadol with the waters of the para aduma? When? First thing in the morning. So Shabbai says, why? It's easy enough to say, what do? Let him do the avodah of the entire day. And I will say, remember again, in the Beis HaMikdash, you weren't working until nightfall, right? Remember again, you're working until when? Right? You're working until before Shkia, before sunset, right? Early before sunset, right? And Tamid Shal Bein Arbayim was usually completed by Mincha Kitana time. So ultimately, again, you were done earlier in the day. So what did they do? After he finishes the avodah, sprinkle him with the waters of the para aduma. And even according to Rabbi Akiva, when we say that it makes you tamei, what type of tuma does it confer upon you? Tuma kala. So what do you need to do? Go to the mikvah while it's still daytime, and then what? Herev shemesh, sun goes down, and by the next morning, you're good to go. So you could get sprinkled every day of the 7 days, and it won't impact your ability to do the avoda at all. I will say incredible, which is such a Musa, if you think about it, that sometimes in life we get locked into problems because we only look at life and we only look at situations through one lens. So you're right, meaning if I'm locked in to sprinkling the waters of the para aduma in the morning, there's no solution. But if I suddenly realize that the ability to sprinkle the waters of the para aduma, who says it has to be in the morning? It could just easily be in the afternoon. So suddenly, again, it goes ahead and opens up a whole new realm of possibilities. And it's such an incredible yesod in life. This is what Stephen Covey calls a paradigm shift, right? That sometimes, again, we get locked into seeing the world and we get locked into seeing ourselves in a certain way. So when life is locked in, when I'm locked in, the pieces could only be moved so much. But if you find the koach to experience a paradigm shift, again, it's not just a piece that could be moved here, a piece that could be moved there, but all of the pieces could be moved there. Is it an incredible? I both say, why didn't the Gemara just suggest this at the beginning? Because again, you see that the Gemara was locked into a particular paradigm. And in the Gemara's paradigm, para aduma water was sprinkled in the morning. Well, in that paradigm, Mishnah can't be like Rabbi Akiva. Comes along Abaye, and Abaye says, let us together experience a paradigm shift. And now once there's a paradigm shift and you can sprinkle the waters in the afternoon, then guess what? The Mishnah works according to everyone. Incredible. Says the Gemara. Now, interestingly enough, so what the Gemara is now going to pick up on is the Mishnah didn't just give me a list of avodos that the Kohen Gadol performs, but the Mishnah also gave me an order, which is quite fascinating. So remember again, the Mishnah said, what else does the Kohen Gadol do? He goes ahead and maktir sakadoros, he offers up the ktores, umeitiv haneros, and he prepares. Now, both saying meitiv, we're going to see, really means two things. It means a cleaning out of the ash, but it also means, again, then also a placement of the wicks, new wicks inside. Meitiv haneros, prepares the menorah. So we'll say, watch this. Alma ketoris bereisha v'hadir neros. So from the Mishnah, you would understand that the order of the Beis Hamikdash was, first, you go ahead and offer up the ketores, and then only afterwards do you prepare the menorah. Right? So the Mishnah is giving me an order. First ketores, then menorah. Chassidus says, that's interesting, because we have a Mishnah in Talmud that contradicts that. Or minhu. Misha zacha b'dishon mizbeach hapanimi. So we'll say, remember, this is quoting over here the Mishnah in Talmud, where we had this. We had the great schus to learn this. And these are all the smaller masechtas, we'll say, at the end of the Daf Yomi cycle. So I think we did Talmud like around Sukkot last year, right? Does that sound about correct? I think it was about then. So the Gemara says as follows. So Misha Zaka B'disha. So here the Mishnayos and Talmud are going through that. Remember, they would draw lots for the various avodos. So the Mishnah says Misha Zaka B'disha Mizbeach Hapanimi. Whoever drew the lot and was privileged to clean out the inner mizbeach. Umisha Zaka B'menorah. Whoever drew the lot to go ahead and take care of the menorah. Umisha Zaka B'ktores. And then whoever drew the lot for the ketores. So we'll say, it sounds like from here, from what? From Talmud, they place menorah before ketores. So what's going on? Our Mishnah said that ultimately, again, ketores comes before the menorah, but yet the Mishnah in Talmud seems to indicate that the menorah comes before the ketores. So what's happening? Rav Huna, Man Tana Talmud. Rav Huna says, who is the author of the Mishnah of Talmud? Rabbi Shimon Ish HaMitzpahi. It's Rabbi Shimon Ish HaMitzpah. Okay, we'll say different author. It's Machlokes Tanaim. Not. We'll say there's room for different opinions. So different opinions. It's a Machlokes. The Mishnah, our Mishnah over here seems to indicate to us that first ketores comes and then menorah. Mishnah and Talmud reflects a different. Rabbi Shimon Ish HaMitzpah. He holds that it's first menorah, then ketores. The problem is even Reb Shimon Ish HaMitzpah doesn't seem to be consistent, because we learned in the Mishnah as well. Balos, we'll say this is talking about over here the blood applications on the mizbeach. I sent you on the WhatsApp right before Shir started just a picture. It's not necessary, but you could see it. Did it go through? Okay, so you can see it again, just to orient you, just to give you a visual aid for what we're about to speak about. So the Gemara says, fellas, this nan, balo lekaren mizrachis tzvonis. So we'll say, if you have to imagine over here, this is the Kohen now doing the blood applications on the mizbeach. So he's walking around the top of the mizbeach. So what happens? He comes to the northeast corner. No same. He goes ahead and he does the blood application. No same mizrachas tzvona. Ma'aravis deromis. He comes ultimately again to the southwest corner. No same ma'arava deroma. He places the blood on the southwest corner. The Tani Allah, and we'll say it was stated on this Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon Ish HaMitzpah Mishana. Rabbi Shimon Ish HaMitzpah, he changes the order, or he changes the order of the blood application. Mishana b'tamid, mizrachis tzifonis, no say mizrachat tzivonam. So he agrees that when the Kohen goes to the northeast corner. He does the blood application on the northeast corner. Ma'aravis Duromis, when he comes to the southwest corner, Rabbi Shimon HaMitzpah ultimately again divides it up now into two applications. No Sein Ma'arava. First, he does one application in the west, and then he goes ahead and he puts it in the south. So Shabbos said, what the Gemara is picking up on over here is the fact that Rabbi Shimon HaMitzpah is listed as a disputant in the Mishnah, indicates to us what? He cannot be the author of the Stam Mishnah. Right? Shabbos, remember again, here's our problem. Here's our problem, or not a problem, it's a challenge. Our Mishnah seems to indicate when listing the Avodah, I said, Yoma, here's the problem. Even in Yoma itself, we have a steer, we have a contradiction. Why? What happened in Yoma? Listen to this. We'll get to this a little bit. Where is this? Look, come on, Chav Hey. We'll see this in just a couple of days, 10 days from now. This nan, listen to this incredible Gemara. This nan, Payis Hasheni. So we'll say the Gemara over here. We'll get to this a little bit later on. Part of the exciting part of Maseches Yoma, we'll say, is we're going to really get into the avoda. Now I know when sometimes we get a little bit scared off by these kind of things, avoda, karbonos, tumatara, like you start to shake and get nervous. They'll say, no, this is beautiful because this is going to give us a window into how the Beis Hamikdash was actually run. So watch this. So this nan, hapayis hashin, both say, so we're going to see they would draw lots for all of the avodos. They would draw lots. So Payis Hashem, the second lottery, was done to determine what? Mi Shochet, who does the Shechita, we'll say this is of the Tamid. Mi Zorek, who does the Zrika. Mi Medashem Mizbeach HaPanimi, who would clean out the ash from the inner Mizbeach. So we'll say this was the Mizbeach HaKitaros. But I just want to point out something amazing. If you notice, they're essentially going ahead and drawing lots for what? Who gets to take out the garbage? Right? Mi medashim izechrin, which will say teaches us such an incredible lesson that when it comes to serving, not just in the Beis Hamikdash, when it comes to serving in a kehila, in a shul, in a community, a person should never think that anything is beneath them. It is an honor to serve. And if the Kohanim were going ahead and drawing lots in order to figure out who would take out the ash. I was just telling someone the other day, I forgot how this came up. Rabbi Price, Zichron Livracha, was the previous Rav in the shul. I never had the opportunity to meet him, but I was told on a number of occasions that on Sunday mornings he would put the lettering. There's a box right in front of the shul. So it used to be they used Let's assume for a moment that we adopt this model of we'll call it 5 and 2. So now you're presupposing both say in Abaye's model, according to the Gemara, in fact, it wasn't the Ketores in between the 5 and 2, but rather what was it? It was the Zrika. It was the sprinkling of the blood of the Tamid. So we'll say, even if you adopt the 5-2 model, it's a machlokas whether or not that's Ketores or something else. To which the Gemara says, Amil Kasha, Hahila, Abashol, Halad Rabbanan. We'll say, you're right. We'll say, a lot of machlokas happening over here. A lot of machlokas. Rabbi says, we're going to see right now, we're going with the model, we're going to see that there's a machlokas in general about how the menorah was arranged. Were the entire 7 taken care of at once, or was it split up 5 and 2? Even according to the opinion that says it was split up 5 and 2, which means that by definition there was another avoda placed there in the middle between the 5 neros, first 5 and the last 2. There's now going to be a machlokes which avoda was in there in the middle. So watch this. Here we go. We'll finish with this. So the Gemara says, "Desanya lo yetiv es haneros va'achar kach yaktir." You should not go ahead and arrange all of the neros and then do the ketores. Rather, ela yaktir va'achar kach yetiv. Rather, both say, what should you do? First, arrange 5 of the neros. Then what? Then do the ketores, and then do the remaining 2 neros. Abba Shol says no. Meitiv va'achar kach matir. But say Abba Shol disagrees, and Abba Shol says no, that's not the way to do it. Rather, again, first what you do is arrange the entire menorah, all 7, and ultimately again, then the ketores. So both say fundamental machlokes, the Rabbanon and Abba Shol, right? Rabbanon hold, we split up the hatavas hamenorah. We split up the arranging of the menorah. First we do 5 neros, then we do ketores, and then ultimately the remaining 2. The Rabbanon hold no. The Rabbanon, I'm sorry, both say no. That is the Rabbanon, right? The Rabbanon say first we do 5, then ketores, then the 2 remaining neros. Abba Shol says no. First we do the entire menorah, and then all 7, and then only afterwards do we go ahead and do the Aktara. Do we do the Ketores? Look at the last question of Daf Abba Shol Omer Meitiv as Kulam Kodim Laktara. So we'll say we're going to see exactly how this plays out. But Abba Shol says we go ahead and arrange all of them before the Haktara, before ultimately we do the Ketores. But yet we'll interrupt with the blood of the Tamid. We'll see what that means in just a moment. So we'll say my time with Abba Shol. So we'll stop over here for today. In Meretz Hashem, we'll pick up with the Machlokes Abba Shol and the Rabbanon ultimately tomorrow. Let's say Shkoyach.